Today, this panel is going to be discussing survivor's remorse. Sorry about the breath, I sprinted here. So we have a wonderful discussion today about the experience of survivor's remorse. Our session is going to be led by Susan Reynolds. Susan is a licensed social worker. She's been working in the HD community for several years. She previously worked in her capacity up at the Center of Excellence at the University of Washington in Seattle, and now serves as the chapter social worker for both Orange County and San Diego. So thank you, Susan. And on our panel is going to be a family member, Joyce Cyrano. Joyce is a volunteer in South Carolina. She has been part of this community for many years, and it's been her mission to give back and advocate for those members of the community who cannot advocate for themselves anymore. So welcome, both of you. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to all those out there virtually. We're just delighted to be here. As Jennifer said, I'm Susan Reynolds, and I am so thrilled to be back together and just wrap my arms around everybody near and far. And today I think we have a highly interactive conversation. So Joyce is going to tell the story of her family, and I'm going to give a little bit of background about survivor's remorse, and we'll be also talking about survivor's guilt. So if anyone has questions, Joyce and I really would like to hear people's feedback about that. I want to just recognize, though, the incredible morning session that we've already participated in. And because I always carry an airline ticket when I travel and a pen, I wrote down a couple thoughts from Louise. And two things really struck me, of course, was starting the morning off with hope. So I'd like everybody on the count of three to say hope. I just love that. 1, 2, 3, hope. Thank you. Also, I think this session is really in good stead with one of the three goals that we're working on, and that is to empower and support our HD families. So our goal today is to really take it from the Ed and Jeff high-level research, although Star Wars was perfect, and to really talk about how do we work together as professionals, as community, as family members to support and encourage each and every one, wherever you are with this disease. And I think you'll find from Joyce's stories that you will all have your own stories, and we want to hear them and engage in that conversation. So with no further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. Just so you know, this is a Huntington's disease workshop, and all this information that we're providing today is an educational model that everything that we talk about is for informational use only. If you have any questions about anything that we talk about, please consult your primary care provider, your neurologist, your other healthcare team members about any advice, exercise, medication, treatment. So we are really here to provide education and equally here to learn from you. Also, as you can see, I've just taken off my mask. That's because I'm a speaker. We really ask that you all wear your mask for the safety and welfare of each other, and as you travel from here to wherever you're going and your final destination home. So thanks for doing that. If you're not able, please just be very respectful of everyone. So thank you. Okay, so let's talk about the objectives of today. I think our goal is to define what survivor's remorse is. So we're going to talk about that, and also kind of the strengths and risk factors that people have when they're experiencing survivor's remorse. And I want to say that survivor's remorse is not a one-time event. As we go into the definition, I think you'll understand what I talk about, and then Joyce is also really going to delve into this area. And then also to really develop an understanding of what HD family members experience, and we're going to hear that from one person and then hopefully from all of you in the room today. So be sure to be thinking as we both talk about specific things that this may bring up for you. I wanted to tell you that as I was preparing this presentation, I was also doing my research, and in going back over the literature, I had to go back to 2001 to find an article that was written about in the Western Journal of Medicine, which was written on the psychological effects of HD testing. And I had to go back that far, and then I had to go forward to 2018 when our moderator, Jennifer Simpson, and a family member did Here's the Deal, Survivor's Guilt. So there's not a lot out there about specifically HD remorse and survivor's guilt. However, as we go forward, what we're going to find out is there's a lot in the literature about this with regard to trauma. And so having worked with survivors of Nazi Germany, we knew a lot about it because of the persecution. We also know a lot about it with natural disasters and horrific crimes that have recently affected our communities. So let's define survivor's remorse. It's guilt that develops in people who have survived a life-threatening situation. So we all can think about a situation that we may have experienced on our own, or that somebody we know or that we have read about has happened. And so if we're the survivor, there may be feelings of guilt, of remorse for surviving. Joyce is going to address that. It's a very common reaction to a trauma in our lives. And so it's not pathologized. It's not abnormal. What can happen afterwards may cause tremendous personal, emotional, traumatic issues that may happen immediately. They may happen a few months down the road. They may happen several years. I think many of you will attest to the ongoing trauma that can happen within a Huntington's disease family, within our larger Huntington's disease community. It's also a symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder. However, I think it's really important to know that not everyone who has survivor's remorse or survivor's guilt develops post-traumatic stress disorder, also called PTSD. So again, as you think about your own story, the story of others that you've heard or things that you've learned about, that word may come up. And PTSD is actually in the DSM-5. However, survivor's remorse is a symptom, not a mental illness. So I want to be very clear in explaining the difference. So let's talk about some of the symptoms that people develop with regard to survivor's remorse and survivor's guilt, but also the responses that people who are at risk for HD, who have tested negative for HD, who are family members, who are parents, adult children, young children may go through. And I think the biggest one that I certainly found consistently in my research and in my practice experience working with people with HD is, why did I test negative? Or why don't I know what's going on with me? What I know is right in front of me. My family member has tested positive. It's not fair. I don't want it. I wish I could take that on myself. I've heard that countlessly as I early in my practice sat in visits and thought, okay, this is going to be a joyful occasion. And people burst into tears or sobs or simply just stared, the 100-yard stare, because all of a sudden their expectations, their role in life right now and in the future had suddenly changed. The other thing I've seen a lot is sadness, that inability sometimes to find the happiness, the joy in today and day living. And I think that these are, again, human, normal, whatever that word means to all of us, responses that we have to an unthinkable thing that we don't have the disease, someone that we love do, or we don't know. We remain at risk for this disease. Other things that I have seen are depression. And while I may not see that in my practice immediately, I've talked with people on the phone, or I've met with them individually after they have been there to the clinic and tested. And depression is when people have a sustained loss of interest, a disengagement from their life, from their activities, sometimes from caring for oneself. And it's very difficult, and it's hard when we're like, why are you sad? You don't have it. Or you're healthy, you're happy, you look great, things are going well. Why is it that the person is unable to experience that? That's part of survivor's remorse, part of survivor's guilt. As many of you in this room may attest, if you've been tested or you have not developed symptoms, that you may feel relief, tremendous relief. And that relief, that joyfulness of knowing I'm not going to be one, I hope, to develop HD, or I'm not going to pass this on, can oftentimes be followed really by feelings of guilt. And that circle starts all over again. So remember, it's not a single event. This is on a continuum. There's no time frame that you will say it started and it finished. What you need to be aware of is about the topics we're going to be talking about next, which are about self-care. But before we do that, I want to talk about other symptoms that you may experience, because I think these are very important, and sometimes we have a hard time saying these out loud because we think we're going to plant them in someone's mind. And I want to tell you that what we're here about is we're here about that circle of support. That family is everything. How do we support the person, whether they're at risk or have tested negative or have tested positive? Because thoughts of self-harm, thoughts about ending one's life, suicide can and do come up. The literature shows that 1 in 4 individuals may have those thoughts. That doesn't mean that someone's going to act on them. It means that they need to express that and then have the support to help them during that time. Using substances for coping. I mean, we have, our substances like alcohol, we have substances like marijuana, we have a lot of other drugs, crack and meth and cocaine, that people can use. And sometimes in an attempt to stop the thoughts, the anxiety, people can and do turn to these. And so I think it's really important is to do that self-inventory. Where am I? How am I coping? What am I doing? Is there another coping mechanism that I can use? And when we talk about self-care, that's going to be one of the biggies. Also, physical symptoms. Think about if you've ever been in a fight or flight response. You've been in a high-stress situation. Your head starts to race. You feel nauseous, that little sickening feeling in your stomach. You can't eat, or you just want to eat and stuff and fill yourself because you want to try to stop the thinking, the feelings that are going on. You can't sleep. Well, when I first landed here, I was awake at night because I was excited to see everyone. I was missing the people that weren't able to be here today. I was thinking about the people back at home that are just joining us virtually. And so that's a different reason. But sleep difficulties are very common. And so if these things are happening to you, you do not need to be silent. Reach out, grab a hand, talk with somebody, and we're going to talk about, who some of those people are. One of the things I think that's also really important is that you, as a part of this community, both near and far, really think from each perspective, from the family member's perspective. The parent, who may feel it's their fault, that tremendous guilt that I somehow pass this on to my child. We know that no one would ever intentionally do that. I have learned in my lifetime of work as a social worker, in my own family of origin, and in all the families that I've been invited into, that foundation of love and wanting to do the best is so important. However, this is real. Parents feel it. they talk about it. Sometimes they don't talk about it, and it just infiltrates their body. And at some point, we hope that they will and can find someone to talk about. Siblings, that incredible wish that they could prevent their brother, their sister from inheriting this disease, and that they want to somehow take it away. And, you know, again, these are very human emotions. Partners and spouses. Okay, we're the healthy ones. Wait a minute. We have people that we love that have this. And I wasn't planning to be a caregiver. I was planning to go on that cruise. I was planning to plant a garden. I was planning to move to Europe. All those things. And suddenly, all those questions, all those perspectives of now, how do I live my life and also at some level be a caregiver? Because we know even when people aren't living next to each other or directly caring for someone with HD, that role of caregiver has many shades. And so you may be calling from afar, you may be directing, you may be sending ideas you're going to learn today at convention and you're going to take home. You're always a caregiver at some level, even if you're not doing the day-to-day hands-on. I think the other thing is that for many people, I'm going to use the term life interrupted. I was thinking about having children. You know, I was thinking about what else I want to do in my life, and now should I do those things, or should I step into my role as a family member, as a caregiver? Am I worth it to go forward with my own dreams? I believe we all are worth it, and yet you have to talk about this, you have to study it, you have to understand it in order to go forward. So to me, that's a really critical factor. And I used to go to a lot of the NYA events because I wanted to hear from young people, you know, who are at a very different stage of life than I am, about how do I go forward? How do I live with knowing that I'm at risk? Or I don't have it, and my sister does, or my brother does, or my aunt, whoever it is. It's about, again, the integrity of living and finding the ways to support oneself with doing that. Okay, self-care. I always want to jump to self-care just because I think this is so important, and I've really tried to model this in my own life and with the people that I work with, because I think if we can learn, and I've just been on about 20 planes in the last 6 months for a variety of reasons, if we can learn to put our oxygen mask on so that we can breathe, so that we can be present, so that we can be there for others, we've just started something really important. And that, again, with life, this is a process. With Huntington's disease, it's very immediate, as well as a long-term disease. I was a marathon runner in my life, and so I was always focused on the long term, on the training, on the goal of completing that 26.2-mile run. So I entered the world of Huntington's with that in my mind, and what I quickly found out was that those of you in families with Huntington's, those of you with Huntington's yourself, us professionals, we need to take the long approach and to be present in the moment and also to live for that moment. I think that's really important, because if we get too far ahead of ourselves, we get lost in the weeds, we get lost in the trees. And if we go back too far, the what ifs, shoulda, coulda, wouldas, we develop that anxiety, and again, that remorse can be further reinforced because we're thinking, if only I had done something different. So again, if we go to self-care, be in the moment, be present. A colleague of mine always talks about mindful walking, that if we walk in the moment, if we are just open and willing to have things happen in our life, that we can be more fully present. So there's some great ways to do self-care. And because I'm a social worker, I'm married to a social worker who's been a therapist his whole career, many friends and colleagues. I think that counseling can be very helpful. And fortunately, through the HDSA, we have many social workers all around the country, as well as psychologists, genetic counselors. We have our neurologists. And there are also many other resources for counseling. We have the HDSA telehealth, and there are some wonderful counselors in our communities that we can find locally by checking in with our centers of excellence or our chapters, and also doing our own homework to find out who's going to be the right fit, because it may or may not be the person that someone else raves about. It's got to be somebody who you can talk to, who you can trust your business with. Because if we can't trust that that person's going to hold that and walk alongside of us, we may need to find someone else. So if at first you don't find that connection, keep open to the fact that we can find someone. You know, our friends, our family are also great resources. I use the term informal counseling, but finding somebody that we can partner with who's there for us. And so that may change over time. Sometimes we need a professional. Other times we just need somebody from the NYA that we know has our back, who knows our story. And so it may be different over time. So just know that. I think that the other thing is back to that comment about how do you find optimism in your own life? How do you give yourself permission to go on if you remain at risk, or you have Huntington's, or you're negative for Huntington's? How do you be present and be available to others? And also, how do you know when to take a break? As we were getting ready to start, Joyce introduced me to a friend and colleague of hers, and she said this friend helped reintroduce me into the Huntington's community because I needed to take a break. Well, I got to tell you, we all need to take a break. Everybody sleep last night? I hope so, because that's a break. Or my first convention, a colleague of mine said, it's okay that you're feeling overwhelmed. This is a very emotional experience. Go lay down, close your eyes, take a walk. And that was the best advice she could have given me, because I just needed a little break. I was coming back, I'm in. But I needed a break. And so remember that if you get too overloaded, take a break, go for a walk, you know, read a book, call a friend, do whatever, text. We all have our different ways. That's really important. The other thing that I love, because I'm a support group facilitator for HDSA, is to bring people together. So I'm really thrilled to see everybody in this room. And because I live in San Diego, we can meet at the beach. So we finally have a group meeting in person again. But join a support group, you know, meet other people virtually, in person, today, tomorrow at convention. Find others that you may feel connected with and kinship with. Also, participating in research. Boy, did we hear a lot about HD Enroll this morning. Find a way to get involved if that's something. If you want to go out today and give blood, there's a way to do that. Did I think I'd see that at convention? No. I mean, so, you know, there are so many exciting things that we can do to be involved. And remember, if you're not ready to do that, it's okay to take a break. Just remember, come back into yourself, be present, so that you can re-engage. And that's where sometimes people can have problems, because they feel like they're never going to be able to move forward. So again, if that's where you are, and you may be in that place at different times in your life, seek someone out, seek out a professional, call somebody that you trust and say, hey, I need somebody to talk to. So don't ever neglect yourself, because in doing that, it's very difficult then to remain present in life. The other thing that I just think is incredible, just in the short time I've been in California, I have met people that are advocating for family members, for research, for changes to the Social Security law about Medicare. So advocacy is another tremendous way to be involved. You're going to be continuing to hear about HD parity over the weekend. So whatever you can do Be involved at what works for you. And then there's going to be others that are doing the other kind of work. So it's like we all got to do this together. We're a huge team. And without the strengths and abilities of people, we won't be able to do that. So those are just some ideas I have about self-care. I hope to hear from all of you other self-care tools and techniques and strategies that you do. Now, I would be remiss working with HDSA and working at a center of excellence for part of my career and having met a genetic counselor in our audience today, if I didn't talk about predictive testing. Because I think that part of HD, and we heard this earlier today, is that we have the tool now to test for the gene. That does not mean, though, that everybody chooses to be tested, wants to be tested, or will be tested. We know what that tool is, though, and because we think it's important, we want to be able to make sure that there are many personal and protective safeguards for our community. I heard some stories already today from people who, within 5 minutes, they were having a blood draw and they didn't even really know what HD was or how it may impact them. So whatever your process is, we have some people here this weekend who are new in our community who are also talking about testing. So I think we're going to continue to hear the new ways. Just as we've had to do during COVID, we are now excited because we have technology that we never had before to communicate. So these are HDSA recommendations for predictive testing. So why do people oftentimes test? And some of you may nod your heads or this doesn't relate to you. That they're considering committed relationships, they're considering marriage, and they may want to know as they move forward in their life. So moving from a place of not knowing to knowing. So this is one of the big reasons that I've heard in the clinic when I worked there. Also for family planning. So that people, are thinking about bringing a child into the world and they want to know, what are my options? What are my resources? How do I go forward as I bring a child? Also for future planning. Am I going to go to college? Am I going to go for that dream job? Am I going to go to Europe? Am I going to go to Southeast Asia and live? Am I going to follow my heart and do what I've always wanted to do? Or do I need to just stay here and be in my day-to-day life? And finally, sharing information with adult children. And I think all these are very valid reasons for people, and yet it's an important thing. And as some of you may know, I just need to know. I've had so many people that came and said, I gotta know. I'm here in my life right now. I've made the decision. And so what we did in our clinic was that we would make sure that that phone call was made. When that person called, that they talked to our clinic coordinator, that information was gathered about them, about their family. We followed that with an in-person meeting with a genetic counselor to learn more about HD and all of the benefits of testing as well as the risk of testing. And so to really have a chance to learn as well as to have questions answered. The other thing also is really knowing what my resources are. If I decide to go through with testing, what insurance options are out there, disability, all those things that when you're 18 or 20 or 25, you may not have thought about. I learned about it at 25 because I worked in a long-term care facility. I'm like, what's long-term care insurance? Not only did I learn about it, I also realized I didn't have the money for it. But learning about that's really important and I think critical for people. Oops, hold on. Oh, yes, because I am not the best technology person, my next slide is not there. So the next part is that follow-up visit. I've decided to get my blood test, and then I come back. I meet and get my results. I've met with a neurologist. I've gotten my blood test. So I think that's really important. So this allows a process to have somebody who's going to be my partner, my support person throughout this. And I've had people that say, I don't have anybody to be that person. I'm afraid to tell. I don't want to hurt people's feelings. I'm scared. And so one of the things that is part of predictive testing is to really help identify who that person or persons are. I've been in groups of 20, and I've been with some people who've had no one there for them and others that have one or more, and I've been on phone calls during COVID for that. So this is a very personal thing to think about. So I want to mention that. Again, as Louise said, long-windedness gets boring, so I'm going to introduce the wonderful Joyce Sereno, and she's going to take over, and then we're going to have our time together. So come on up, Joyce.
I want y'all to know that it has been an incredible pleasure to work with Susan in planning this meeting and now to listening to her, because survivor's remorse is something we haven't been talking about, but she gets it, she understands it, and she's talked with people who deal with it. So we have the best resource right here at our fingertips to remember that when you're posing questions, okay? So I'm going to tell you my story. And my story isn't necessarily anybody else's story, although I have a feeling that my story is very similar to a lot of you in this room. Because we live in HD families, we have a lot of similar experiences, we have a lot of similar feelings, and yes, we even share survivor's remorse. So I'm going to start with telling you about my family. And this is my dad, Leonard, and my mom, Juanita. So my dad had Huntington's disease, and he passed away at age 61. At the time, I was 31, and I didn't really think that was that big of a deal because 61 seemed old to me then. And now that I'm 65, I have a bit of a different outlook on that. My mom, unfortunately, we just lost a few weeks ago. She was dealing with dementia, and she made it to almost 92, but we lost her just a few weeks ago. My mom was one of those people that read the ad that Marjorie Guthrie placed in the Minneapolis Tribune in the 60s, and my mom showed up at the meeting that Marjorie held to recruit people to get started with the Committee to Combat Huntington's Disease, which then evolved into HDSA. My mom took that seriously, and she was a fierce advocate for HD and HDSA for all of her years. Thus, we all got involved as well. My dad's story begins, however, before mine, obviously, but my sister Sharon and I were in the room with him and my mom the day that he was diagnosed. We were adults. I was married. I think my sister was probably married as well. And it was the first that we learned that my dad's dad and grandfather both committed suicide when the HD symptoms became too much to bear. It was the first we learned about that because we didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about it. So next is my sibling group. And so dead center, oh, that's right, we have a pointer. So in the middle here is my mom, Juanita. The oldest is my brother, Gary. Next is my sister, Eileen, who is 1 year younger than him. 2 years younger than her is Sharon. 4 years younger than her is me. And 8 years younger, did you guys catch a pattern here? 8 years younger is my baby sister, Marlis. My sister, Eileen, was the first to show symptoms. We lost her actually 3 years ago already. I remember having an awful lot of sadness about my sister Eileen and what she went through, but I wouldn't have then termed it remorse. For me, it wasn't until my brother was diagnosed that my remorse began. And I realize that now. The week that he was diagnosed, I dove headfirst into a weekend of sheer depression. I cried through that weekend. Am I crying now telling you about it? I couldn't seem to come to grips with the fact that my brother had this. I'm not sure why it hit me harder than my sister did, but it was about the same time that my baby sister was beginning to show symptoms. And that was not okay with me. You're not supposed to have things happen to your baby sister. You're supposed to be able to protect them and take care of them through everything. So now in looking back, I realized that that's when my remorse was beginning. It wasn't just that they were diagnosed. It was that my remorse was beginning. Now, after the three of them became symptomatic. You can see in the center here, my brother, and you can see what we called the look on his face. My sister Eileen was very advanced, and my baby sister Marlis was already in the throes. Right now, Sharon and I do not believe we are symptomatic, and in our family, we're most likely beyond the age of onset, but who knows? You guys might see something right now that I don't see. So what I need to share with you is that ever since that began, I very seldom now begin an event that is joyous without that little pang in my heart. And some of you know what I'm talking about. That you go to do something fun and you remember that your siblings don't get to do this. So just this week, I had my grandchildren at the beach, and they were boogie boarding, and I was videoing. Well, I was trying to video, because it's really hard to video through tears, because all I could think about was my baby sister isn't going to get this chance. She is hospice ready. She's in late stages HD. She's not going to see her grandchildren boogie board or play baseball or get that award at school or play soccer or the things that I've gotten to see. And it's not fair. It's just not right. It's not fair. I don't ever begin something with my husband, who just recently retired, and we have a lot of plans for what to do in retirement, without that paying again, because I get to enjoy retirement with my husband. My sister and my baby sister don't get to do that. My brother is 72, and he's done really well in his retirement, but that's coming to an end as well. So I've had people say to me, "Oh, aren't you lucky you're negative?" Yeah, no. I don't know for sure I'm negative, but even if I am, I'm sorry. I don't feel like that's luck. That was the draw. That was, and it's not something I feel lucky about. It makes me feel sad. It makes me feel remorseful. So when people say that to me, I kind of look at them like, you really don't know until you've been in their shoes. And I know there are some of you in this room right now, who have. So, no, I have not tested. None of my siblings tested. I know there are people in this room who share that, and I know there are people in this room who did test and tested negative. What I do know is that Susan and I prepared this discussion with a couple of long conversations with someone who did test negative. And what I learned from those conversations is that it doesn't matter how we each got to where we are as far as the remorse. She has the same feelings. She has the same ideas. She has the same attitudes. She feels exactly like I do, even though we came to this spot in a different way. As I said, my sister and I have not tested. We don't think we have Huntington's. We are going to be in a different spot when our nieces and nephews, and there are 9 of them, begin to show symptoms. I can't even go there yet, because that's going to be another tough thing. You have to know one more thing about me. I am an eternal optimist. My glass isn't just half full. My glass is probably most of the time right over here, totally full. I like to look at the bright side. I like to find the positives in almost anything and everything. So when my mom started being involved with HDSA, she got us involved in putting stickers on newsletters and stuffing envelopes and doing garage sales to raise funds, and we did everything. That led to, I was a chapter president of the Minnesota chapter, and I served on the board of HDSA, and I never missed an opportunity to advocate for people with HD. And yes, we did the walks on the Hill, and I helped get a genetic discrimination bill passed in Minnesota, blah, 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 on and on. And even at that, I fell off for a while. I took a break. I could not keep on doing it. We moved to South Carolina. I kind of just stepped back until there's a co-leader of our affiliate in South Carolina whose name is Kim Austin Osborne, and if you've met her, you know you can't say no to her. So when she called me one day and said, we need people to work together to do something in South Carolina, I didn't know how to say no to her, so I didn't. So I became re-involved, I think at the same time that my remorse began. And I now realize it became my coping mechanism. It became how I was going to deal with my remorse. I can't control my gene status, but I can control how I'm going to handle what I do to react to that gene status. So I started working with the Parity Act. I started working with the affiliate in South Carolina. We got a support group started. We're doing a couple of Team Hope Walks that are very instrumental, very successful. And I've been reinvigorated maybe by being involved again. I'm going to encourage people to think about that. We'll come back to that in just a second. So, the Parity Act. We did talk about that. Sorry, I skipped right over that. By the way, if you don't know what the Parity Act is, Jennifer's in the back of the room. She will be glad to help you with that information. The Team Hope Walks, we also talked about that because that is just something that you can really get involved in. By the way, we've raised over $22 million nationwide with Team Hope Walks. That's making a huge difference for families with Huntington's and in research. So don't sell yourself short there. The other thing I do, and you can do as well, educate at every opportunity. This license plate is current. The tag looks kind of pathetic, but it causes people to ask me what that is. Most of the time at the gas station, at the gas pump. And even once in a while, one time was at the ATM. I've had people say, is that heart disease? And one guy even asked me if it was Harley Davidson, and he said, there's no cure for Harley Davidson riders. Yeah, I think he's right. At any rate, okay. But it's an opportunity to advocate and teach people about Huntington's disease. I actually used to keep pamphlets in my glove box to hand to them as I talk to them. So I'm going to encourage you to think about that, to just do the most that you can to help yourself. Susan talked about this a little bit. Survivor's remorse for most people is equated to an event, 9/11, something that happened in a war. It's equated to one event. For us, this is an ongoing thing. It's a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly process because we watch the people that we love with Huntington's disease day after day after day after day. So I don't know what that means as far as the compounding effect in some survivor's remorse, but I'm sure that it has a different effect on us than people that have one traumatic event. Some of you maybe watched this show on Hulu called A Million Little Things. So A Million Little Things is about a group of people, a group of friends, that just like us in the HD family, they consider themselves a family even though they are not biologically related. And in the very first episode, John takes his own life. We learn that John was the glue that held the family, the group together, the quote-unquote family together. He was there when one of them had breast cancer. He was there to cheer him on. Every time somebody had any sort of incident in their life, he was there to cheer him on and lift them up. So they spend the entire first season trying to figure out why John took his own life. And yes, he had some financial things, and he had this, and he had that. And then they learn, and they disclose in the very last episode of the first season, that John missed by seconds getting on an airplane in Boston with his friend on 9/11. And the plane crashed into the towers, and John had experienced for 17 years survivor's remorse. And the reason the friends didn't know, he didn't talk about it. He didn't talk about it to his friends. He didn't talk about it to his wife. He didn't talk about it to any counselors, anybody. And I think we have that same problem. We don't talk about it. I think there are people in this room, I know there are people in this room because a couple of my friends are here that experience the exact same things that I do as far as survivor's remorse. We have siblings that we've lost, one in a very tragic way, and we don't even talk about it. They probably don't even know how deeply this affects me because we don't talk about it. My sister is watching this virtually. My sister that I share everything with. We talk and text every day. For us, a 90-minute phone conversation is kind of a short one. Ask my husband. And she probably doesn't even know how deeply this affects me because we don't talk about it. So today, let's change that. Let's talk about it. Thank you.
You know, talking about survivor's remorse, the thing is it's not just one thing that happens. When you're dealing with Huntington disease, in my case, almost 20 years ago now, my first wife passed away, and she actually hit her head, diagnosed with Huntington disease. And I had anticipated that I was going to go through a long, drawn-out experience where she would end up in a nursing home and all of that, and that didn't happen. She was gone. And I felt, wait a minute, I missed a bullet here in some ways, but I felt a loss. I felt I should have had a couple more years. I travel a lot and things like that. I'm remarried. But in a lot of cases, I think to myself, what would it be like if my first wife was with me? You know? So you have that situation. I have a son who's in a nursing home, who I'm not really taking care of on a day-to-day basis. And I know, because I thought about it with my first wife, that's something I would not be able to do. You know, to be able to go and take care of somebody on a 24-hour basis. You know, I know there are some people who have been able to do that, but you have guilt over that, you know. And so there's all kinds of different things. It's not just one thing that you feel guilty of or that bothers you because of Huntington's disease, how it impacts your life. You know, I know that when I originally got married, I figured, you know, we'd go through life and we'd eventually retire and all that sort of stuff, and that didn't happen, you know. So, you know, the impact I think it has on people is a function of, you know, I kind of relate it to a stone dropping into a pond. And the further you are away from that, where that stone drops, the smaller the waves are. But if it's a son or a sibling or your wife, you're right next to that stone as it falls into the water. And in a lot of cases, even when that stone sinks down to the bottom, you still feel that. And, you know, it's a problem. I know I've been pretty well, dealt with it pretty well, but, and I've kind of read stuff on how people are successful. And, you know, most people in general that live to old age, you're not gonna get to be old and not lose people. It's just part of getting old. And the people that are the most successful tend to be people, and the most healthy are people that are able to continue to make new friends and continue to move on. But a lot of times something happens in somebody's life, and that just kind of is an end. And they just, you know, you lose a spouse, and you're not going to get married again. You know, that's it. That was your spouse, that was the love of your life, that's it. You lose a child, you know. And with HD, you're losing a little bit every single day. So that's a problem. So let me pass this on to somebody else.
Thank you, and I need to, you reminded me in what you were talking about two other things I want to mention. One is, in our discussions and preparing, we actually feel a sense of remorse / guilt because we're even talking about it. Because the people that are affected with Huntington's is who we should be thinking about. And we shouldn't be thinking about ourselves as far as having an issue, because we're not the one with Huntington's, right? And that's not okay. It's what Susan talked about with self-care. We do have to take care of ourselves, exactly what you're saying. We have to take care of ourselves and not feel guilt over guilt. Which brings me to the second thing that you made me think of. We seem to use the terms remorse and guilt interchangeably, and I don't see that. If you use the word guilt, to me that implies that you did something wrong. There was something wrong. I didn't do something wrong in ending up with the gene status I have. You didn't do something wrong in what you did taking care of your wife. Remorse seems to me to be the better terminology for what we experience with losing the people around us to Huntington's. I don't know if you all agree with me.
To me, my sister had HD, and I tested negative. And yeah, I felt, I guess, I thought I felt guilty. But as a man, I tend to try to be a fixer, and I couldn't fix this. So, you know, I was determined, and I know you said it's a coping mechanism, but I was determined to be a warrior and an advocate, and so that was something I could do, and I could say, maybe I could say, I can't save my sister, but maybe I could save future generations.
Mike, thank you for that, because I really totally and completely agree with that you can control only what you can control.
You made me think of someone in a support group that I facilitate, and her role as a warrior is to be that person that says, you don't have control. What you have control over is showing up and being here today and being of support. And I just love that. So thank you for triggering that smiling moment of another person.
I come from a family of Huntington's, I guess, victims, although I kind of hate to use that word, but grandfather, father, aunts, uncles, cousins, brother, you name it, just about everybody was wiped out. I was 10 when my dad died at 45. And there was precious little information back in the 60s. Spoke at the University of Washington, actually, Marjorie Guthrie, in the early 70s. I was 19 and read a little tiny blurb in my college newspaper and got in the car and drove 100 miles to Seattle to give she was doing a federal hearing at that time with Nancy Wexler and capturing information. So that kind of started in the 90s. I started when my brother moved closer to us in the throes of Huntington's. There was no support group or anything in Memphis, so I started one and became an affiliate. But my whole thing about guilt was the whole idea of to whom much is given, much will be expected. And I felt like I was given life and he wasn't. And so I needed to live my life as fully or as fast or as just as much as I could. Now, that comes with a price. You tend to bite off more than you can chew. So, between a career and a marriage and children and that sort of thing, it would be crazy. But I was telling somebody last night that one turning point for me was driving home after work in crazy traffic, late to pick up my son from aftercare and all those things. And I'm, getting anxious and upset about the traffic. And I thought, you know what? Steve would give anything to be behind the wheel of a car stuck in traffic. And he no longer is able to do that. He was not able to have a child to go pick up, whether Lee was late or on time. And so it sort of began to put everything in perspective about the things not to get stressed over. Because guess what? My brother Stephen would have loved to have had the stress that I complain about from time to time. So anyway, like Joyce, I took a break at about the time of my retirement. I was almost 50 when I was finally tested because my adult son had found the girl he wanted to marry, and I thought he should have that information. I was okay not being tested, so was my husband all those years, but I felt like he should know, and I did test negative. So, but yeah, it was hard to be happy about that. But it was just kind of, okay, well, that's a good piece of information. And I just need to keep living my life. So I did step away from the Huntington's leadership for a number of years. We moved to South Carolina. And during COVID, actually eased back into it. This is the first time I've met my South Carolina colleagues. I live in a different part of the state, so I've just met Joyce last night and a couple others today. So anyway, it's time to get back to work. I'm in a new place and I think a better place, for
And Kathy,
leadership.
thank you for bringing that up, though. Just because Kathy and I can be advocates and board members and work with Team Hope Walks, that doesn't mean everybody can all at the same time.
Right.
If you're a caregiver of, or whatever your position life right now dictates for you, you maybe can't be doing those things. Maybe you can do something as simple as send an email to your elected officials about the Parity Act. But if you can't do those things, hang in there. You'll be able to do that at another time. So don't let me communicate to you that I expect that everybody should be doing something to advocate as your coping mechanism, because that doesn't work all the time for everyone.
So my name is Melissa. A lot of people probably know me. I've been around a bit. I was the one who filmed What's the Deal with Jennifer about survivor's guilt. And I appreciate kind of developing this new term and concept of survivor's remorse. And I want to thank you all for today because it is definitely something that needs a space, but I already have pangs. I'm like, I shouldn't even be talking about this. We shouldn't have this space. And like, and me and Mary Ann were shoveling snow in DC when we were there to advocate for the Parity Act, just crying and talking about how guilty we felt about everything. And so we had done a session a while back, and I feel like this has been like one of the best ones, like just on par with kind of what it is and what we need to talk about. And I appreciate y'all so much for that. I think that there's like a million things I could touch on. And I think that even talking about like what really got me and I teared up was when people tell you you're lucky. And it's the same way I feel like when people applause when I announce that I'm gene negative. And the way that I feel when, I'm talking about having to be a caregiver and, my friends go, oh, well, they can meet someone and then their spouse will take care of them and it's off your plate. And just these things that they literally just make me angry. And my situation is that I have 3 siblings and they're all gene positive. 2 are symptomatic. One wants nothing to do with anything, but my brother-in-law's like starting to reach out to me and be like, okay, things are kind of rough now. And then we relocated my brother to live near me and starting to caregive for him. And then my third brother, he's also deaf, and so I've always been on a 100% path of like, I am the only person in the world that can care for him, just due to communication. So that weighs heavily on me, and I couldn't get enough of it, so my fiance's at risk, so I have that too. I'm like, let me just get all the HD in my life. But one thing that we've really found is, and she's really good at checking me, is just staying in the present. Especially when we moved my brother here, is very overwhelming. And I reached out to my doctor, got a therapy, got an antidepressant. It was just time that I needed those things. But staying in the present has been really important. And it's tough. It's tough, and I feel bad for talking about it. But it does need a space, and I think that's the hard thing. And I imagine in that story with John with 9/11, it's like, who am I to say talk about the fact that I didn't get on that plane when obviously it was a huge national tragedy that happened. So I feel like it is like that with the Huntington's community is why, we can't put the spotlight on us, you know what I mean? It's not about us. But I appreciate you guys talking about that, just having a balance and everything. And Joyce, I was wondering, were you ever kind of put in a kind of caregiver role for any of your siblings?
Well, so fortunately, I have this sister, Sharon, who I already told you I can't live without. And, I threatened her that, even a hot air balloon ride that she went on scared the crap out of me, because if something happens to her, I have no clue what I'm going to do, because she is a caregiver. She's a nurse by trade. She even worked as a hospice nurse. And she just took over the role of my mom we had my mom in a care center, but my sister is the caregiver and took over that role. She's doing the same with my brother now as far as ringleading, getting him moved into a long-term care or into an assisted living facility. And she's been the one that did that. And she thinks it's awesome that I do what I do, because she can't be the voice person. She's not the one who's going to go march on Washington. She's not the one that's going to make those phone calls. She's not the one that would stand here and talk to y'all. So we each have, thank God, God called each of us to do what we're supposed to do. So no, I have not done the hands-on caregiving, nor is that my role. And the one thing I've learned through all this is that if I have to, by the way, my husband broke his back last year, so I've had a taste of caregiving. And if it has to be anything more than I did for him, I can't do it. I've learned that about myself. I have such respect for those of you who are caregivers 24/7, because that's not me. I can't do it. So thank God I have my sister. And yes, if I have to do more than that for my husband or any of my children or grandchildren, it'll be hired done. I gotta have help. I know my limitations.
I love how Joyce keeps on learning 34 years later. She shared with her father, and you know what? Again, when we remain in ourselves and identify who we are, we do great things. So thank you for the incredible example.
You know, the other thing that happens with age is that whole thing about you no longer worry about what you're saying. You just go ahead and say it. Well, I've also learned about myself, and I'm willing to say to you, this is my limitation.
Hi, I'm Giovanna, and I'm very positive. And so I take it as, but I'm also an advocate. So I take it as our role is to help the community. I have Huntington's, but very mildly, and my sister has it worse. And so for me, I have to be an advocate for her to sort of understand, like, the drug trials, to try to help her, and there's a point when people cognitively lose the ability to make good decisions. So I think all support groups should have that in their sort of narrative about testing, is that you want to be smart when you are thinking about your future. And when you test early, like I started to find out I had symptoms, and then I got tested 2010. So I knew that I had it, and then I went through, a crisis for a while. But then I could then have strategies and help my family. And I did it when I was still smart enough, and that's what I'm saying. You have to sort of advocate with this understanding that not everyone with Huntington's loses their cognitive ability. Sometimes it's about you can't talk, or you're choking, but sometimes it is cognitive. Like my sister never saw her symptoms. She never could, I saw a video of me and I knew I had, tics and movements. And so that's what we have to do too. Like if your family had cancer, you wouldn't say, oh, we'll just, wing it. Good luck with that. And so that's my message too, that we have to be real strong advocates in a way that is pushy sometimes. Thank you.
And I love how you've just, again, added to our definition of survivor's remorse. You also are a survivor, and you also experienced that remorse. And what you did was you took it as you were able and continue to be able to educate those in your family and to bring that here today. So again, I think that's the synergistic power of being together, is that we then add that to our backpack, front pack, and our cape of how we move forward. Thank you.
So I have a technical question, but then I also wanted to speak to something that was brought up previously. So I think something which compounds the survivor's guilt that I had is not doing enough with my life. So feeling like the expectations that I need to set for myself should be much higher. I should live hard and fast, as it was stated. And when I don't meet those markers, there's the survivor's guilt compounded with disappointment in what I wasn't able to achieve, compounded with co-signing that taking things for granted, or taking the opportunities that I had for granted and not optimizing them in ways that people in my life were not able to do. So like where it comes to education, I can't just get an MBA or I can't just get a postgraduate, it has to be a doctorate. And I can't just have, I can't just own a moderate home, I have to own my own home, and it has to be large and signed in my name. And I have to always be focused on my fitness because the people around me didn't have the opportunity to live healthily. And all of those things, are sort of compounding, and they're pressures that add up. But I do have a real and genuine kind of technical question. So I have a sibling who's HD positive, and she's living. So my father is the power of attorney, and he basically oversees her health and well-being, but he doesn't actually. He purchased an apartment for her and sort of abandoned her there. And when I went, she's probably, I would say, mid to late stage. So when I went to visit her, like her hair was all matted against her head, and her nails were long and yellow, and her teeth were yellow, and she just had been unkempt and uncared for quite some time. And I came to understand that he is providing access to her food. He's buying, 24 packs of canned soda and individualized non-perishables like wrapped cakes and candies, and that's what she's living off of alone. And like what is biding her time is Netflix. Like nobody comes to visit her. I mean, the personal angle for me is, of course, he's a retiree. He was a nurse at one point in his career, and he lives 20 minutes away from her, and never visits her. He just bought an apartment and left her there. So without power of attorney, I went to Adult Protective Services, which in South Carolina were kind of limited in what they could do. And I'm trying to figure out, like, she does get Social Security, but like where can I help? Like, how can I have access to Social Security to help her get Meals on Wheels or like something more nutritious? How can I get a home health aide at the very least if she's resistant to getting into convalescence because she'll lose all of her, access to independence, whatever that looks like. And also, the compulsory behaviors, like she's smoking, as I'm sure many of you know, she smokes down to the filter, her fingers have burns on them, they're stained with yellow, like all the characteristics. So there's safety concerns, she's falling, she's abandoned, her health is, degenerative in addition to what the disease is causing. Like, where is my role? From 800 miles away, I live in Boston. And among our siblings, I'm really the only one actively interested in doing something to ameliorate conditions.
So you just took us into a whole nother realm. And so what we're going to need to do is guide you to a couple people with HDSA that can help you.
Great.
Because we have a staff person who knows the disability insurance and all of that aspect, and then we have these amazing social workers who can help you with all of the rest. So we need to guide you to a couple of other people. So don't leave this room today before we give you some names, okay? Do you have something to add to that, Susan? Okay. Right. So let's save that, and we'll give you a guide to who can help you with that. But thank you for bringing that up. And by the way, that is one of those things that is remorseful, is that she's not getting the care she needs, and then that makes you feel that remorse as well. So, Jennifer, how are we on time?
I think
Has anybody been paying any attention?
we have 3 minutes, so if we have one more.
It's actually for you.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what the Perry Act is.
Oh, boy, okay, hi. So come see me at 3:30 in the advocacy session, but I can give you a really quick overview for folks in the room. So the Huntington's Disease Parity Act is a piece of policy that HDSA in this community has been trying to pass for more than 10 years, and it's a pretty simple little piece of policy. So how the system works right now is if you are eligible for Social Security disability insurance, which a lot of folks impacted by HD are and will need to utilize later in their life, what happens is that once you qualify for SSDI, you get put in a 24-hour or a 24-month waiting period for Medicare. So what that means is if I'm getting SSDI, I can't have any meaningful employment, right? I'm not working, I'm not likely earning a wage, and what comes with that also is I've likely lost my employer-sponsored health insurance. Right, I've lost my health insurance. I might not qualify for Medicaid because there's a 5-year look back and I might have too many assets. I might not have a spouse who can add me to their health insurance, or I might have a spouse but we can't afford it to add me to their health insurance. So what happens in those 2 years? When you're symptomatic, when you're sick, when you need access to a neurologist, to a physical therapist, to an occupational therapist, to your psychiatrist to manage your symptoms. What we see is folks fall through the cracks, right? They're hospitalized, they go unmanaged. They end up in situations that are thoroughly avoidable and put families through more stress than they ever need or deserve. So the HD Parity Act would waive that 24-month waiting period for folks with HD who are eligible for SSDI. So what would happen is once you qualify, once SSDI says, yep, you're approved, Medicare kicks in immediately. So, and there's also another additional 5-month benefit wait period in the event that you qualify for SSDI and it's within a 5-month period. They'll make you wait until you get 5 months to get your financial benefit. So we're asking to waive that as well. So everything kicks in immediately once you qualify for SSDI.
The reason it's called Parity Act, by the way, is because they already do that for ALS.
Yeah.
Okay? So what they're trying to do is they're trying to go and make HD similar to ALS as far as how SSDI and
Treats them.
Medicare.
Yeah, and there are a couple things that we'll talk about in our advocacy session. We'll talk about not only what the Parity Act is, how you can get involved, but also how you can craft your story as you're talking to your legislators and your members of Congress to really impress upon them and create visibility for Huntington's disease. Because I think that's one of the things that is really difficult, is creating visibility for this disease. But the best way for us to do that is to stand up and be those voices in the room and be those folks who are making noise with our members of Congress. Because we know it's easier for other diseases, right, where it's not genetic, where it's not autosomal dominant, where it's not multiple people in a generation. So that's why it's on us to be those folks in the room and get others in the room with us.
We have heard so many stories today, Joyce, all of you. We've talked about advocacy. We've talked about HD parity. May this conversation continue throughout the weekend. Be sure to let others know that in the next 1 to 2 weeks, this will be available for them online. I want to especially thank everybody who is able to be here in person today and our virtual attendees. We couldn't do it without all of you. Joyce, thank you. Jennifer, thanks for moderating. And to all of you, a big thanks and shout out for hope. Thank you.
And thank you, Susan. And know that Susan and I are here all weekend. If you have other questions or if you want to share your stories, we're here. We're around to listen. Thank you.